Hello, I am the cartoonist M. Rashid. This cartoon was inspired by a comment that uh, ADOS co-founder uh, Yvette Carnell. She made a comment about during her show where she was breaking down um, monopolies and how they've been used to lock Black Americans out of access to the wealth building class. And inside of her comment, she mentioned that a lot of times during our um, bootstraps, entrepreneurship, powernomics type rhetoric, we fail to realize the hurdles that are in the way of us having thriving, like successful businesses. You know, monopolies is definitely one. You know, like I've mentioned a few times, and the monopoly is the highest form of systemic racism. Like it's designed as the direct counter to the 1866 Civil Rights Act. So uh, this cartoon uses the hurdle as the monopolies, thus being economically excluded from those kinds of practices and stuff. But in addition to that, uh, there's a pre-hurdle that keeps us from even getting to addressing uh, monopolies and attacks upon the capitalist free open markets, and that's the fact that we have this indoctrination taint upon us from 100 years of communist rhetoric and propaganda directed at us. You know, this is very important. For the last 100 years, our Black liberation, Black empowerment movements, the civil rights movement, were infiltrated by communist spies and redirected to other people's goals. You know, so this was embedded deep, and this can't be underestimated. This is very important. The communists came to America, infiltrated all worthwhile causes while they were like stealing like Manhattan Project secrets and stuff and sending it back to the old world. It was a lot of very serious things going on. But because generations of Black Americans had been hearing this rhetoric from these people actively trying to influence us, today we have a sympathetic ear to anything communist Marxist. Like, we don't dismiss it or treat it like the enemy when we hear it. The same way whites don't immediately dismiss like white supremacist rhetoric and stuff for the same reason. Like, they've been hearing that stuff organically among them forever. So they don't immediately treat someone saying something racist as if it's the worst thing ever. They're like, well, wait a minute, maybe he didn't. They'll give all kinds of excuses and stuff, in the same way we do over communism. There's a difference between safety net policies and policies designed to like give the poor economic floor, and like the state and the government reaching in and helping. There's a difference between that and like the formal group of the Communist Party of the USA. There's a difference between the abstract principles and stuff and figuring out how to strategize and apply them to our needs inside of like a free and fair and properly regulated capitalism versus diabolical outsiders using a certain type of rhetoric in attacking us and pretending they're our allies. These are two completely separate things. The problem with Black Americans is because we have been trained and indoctrinated to have that sympathetic ear for it, that often we don't discern between the two and will emotionally react to people explaining that no, the Marxist's definition and rhetoric around capitalism is not default truth. This is ideology. And the fact that we keep using his ideology and his lens to seeing stuff is hampering us. Pointing that out to people triggers them, and they will like immediately get defensive and so, you know, brother, you need to calm down, and it ain't black and white like that, brother. You know, it's a problem because this is a group that's using rhetoric but doing something else that actually isn't reflecting the rhetoric. In-state communism is devastating. It's blood, it's slavery, it's horrifying. It's everything you see in the old world from those communist regimes that came up in the 20th century. Everything that represents with the cult of personality and the reigns of terror and all that stuff. That's where those formal like communist groups lead to. It's okay to have the conversations about alternate and additional like economic systems and how the American descendants of slavery ourselves as a wealthless bottom caste need to be buoyed up before we can even get to the part of like successful capitalist businesses. That's a completely different thing than this other thing that attacked us and derailed our like liberation, like empowerment movement. You know, it's important that we discern between the two. This is very serious, and I think Yvette's latest show where she's like explaining how monopolies functioned and stuff, and how black leaders in the past, like before those civil rights proper, they were the beginning of the civil rights. We often talk about the 60s and the 50s as civil rights like movement, but it actually began with the 1866 Civil Rights Act. The people who fought to make that happen during Reconstruction, you know, and probably just before, you know, that rhetoric on them recognized the stuff we needed, you know, to be successful and economic included. This was a capitalist talk. And it was they who were also very pro antitrust law. They recognized capitalism and how it functions requires the free open markets of competition in order to function. And that system is extremely vulnerable to greed, to like powerful, greedy people who only want all the revenue of an industry and its markets for themselves. So because it's vulnerable to that, the government has to like seriously watch over it and protect it from business entities. You know, early Black American civil rights activists recognized that and wanted us to do well in business, so that as a empowering tool that we needed. But they also knew that if those markets weren't being protected for everybody, then we would suffer. You know, so the counter to that was to allow bigness to take over, close the markets, you know, and then retrain us into hating capitalism. So it's not good that we have that listening ear to communism as a thing, we're naturally sympathetic to it because of generations of indoctrination, and we must throw that off of us. Please. Peace.